With the new decade quickly approaching, there is set to be a whole new generation of players that by the end of the 20s will have cemented their place in the NFL, and we will know what type of player these players are. Some of the top receivers from the 2010s include, in no order, Julio Jones, Antonio Brown, AJ Green, Calvin Johnson, and Larry Fitzgerald. Some tight ends include Rob Gronkowski, Jason Witten, and Jimmy Graham. Other dominant wideouts of the decade include DeAndre Hopkins, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, and Michael Thomas. We will have new faces in the 2020s and premier wideouts in the coming decade, which brings us to the topic of today's video, as we will discuss who I think will be the biggest receivers of the 20s. Before we get started though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. I'm going to start this video by saying I fully plan on going back to this and looking at my predictions at the end of the decade, and I hope to see what went right and what went wrong. But the first few receivers I'll talk about are players I think will have a good impact in the 20s, but not necessarily be near the top like the previously mentioned receivers were. The first receiver I'll address is current Saints superstar Michael Thomas. Can't guard Mike is the GOAT receiver through 4 years of his career, but the reality is he will be 27 this offseason, and for 40% of the decade he will be ages 33 to 36 and not in a prime position to produce. One would also have to think when Drew retires, his production will drop, and by how much is the question everyone wants to know. At the time of this video, he has played a few games with Teddy Bridgewater as his quarterback, but that's not a big enough sample size to determine how he will perform consistently when Drew does eventually retire. Because of that reason, I don't think Michael Thomas will be looked at as the primary receiver of the 20s because of age towards the end of the decade and ultimately going from a top 2 or 3 quarterback all time to who knows who. A few more receivers who are great at the time of this video that I don't think will be the receivers of the decade are Davante Adams and Tyreek Hill. Diving into Davante first, and this one is for primarily the same reasons as Mike Thomas. Adams is already 27 and will be in his mid to late 30s for the middle to later half of the decade, and with Aaron Rodgers' play declining already, Adams' numbers simply won't go up as he ages. Tyreek is interesting because he's only 25, and the reason I think Tyreek won't be a hugely dominant receiver in the 20s is his primary weapon is his speed. Not to take away from him being a great route runner or his connection with Patrick Mahomes, but at some point Tyreek won't be a sub 4.3 40 guy, and he will be a small receiver with good NFL speed. Tyreek's speed will go out at some point, and the question is when, and that's a question I nor anyone else have an answer to, but through 4 years of his career, Tyreek looks to have a good rest of his career ahead of him. By the way, this isn't a knock on Tyreek or to say he's a bad player. I'm just saying that he won't be a top 2 or 3 receiver over the course of the next decade. Now looking at DJ Moore, and he just completed his second season in which he had 87 catches for 1,175 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was top 5 in the NFL in receiving yards for most of the season, and with a team that finished just 5-11 and having offensive weapon Christian McCaffrey as a teammate, it's easy to see how his production was overlooked. DJ's quarterback for the majority of this season was undrafted rookie Kyle Allen due to Cam Newton going down back in week 2. With this type of production from a below average quarterback at 22 years old, DJ has serious potential to be a top receiver of the 2020s. He will be just 32 in 2029, and while that's not a great age for receivers or any position aside from quarterback for that matter, it's not the 36 or 37 years old that Michael Thomas and Davante Adams will be at that time. Hypothetically, if DJ could average 80 catches per year and 1,000 yards per year, which is achievable considering the year he just had with the quarterback play he had, that would put him at 800 catches and 10,000 yards for the decade. I'm not saying that will happen and to consistently draft DJ Moore in fantasy and expect this, but he, as of now, is definitely a serious contender for receiver of the 20s. Next up is Marquise Brown of the Ravens, who just completed his rookie season and finished with 46 catches for 584 yards and 7 touchdowns. With Lamar Jackson being the franchise quarterback in Baltimore, it's hard to imagine these two not developing great chemistry over the next few years and ultimately for the rest of their time together in Baltimore. Both players are just 22 years old, and with Lamar being the MVP this young, it's impossible to not acknowledge the potential Hollywood has for the next decade. Lamar threw for 36 touchdowns this year, and while Hollywood had just one 100-yard game back in week 1, he is in for a bright future. He had more touchdowns in 2019 than Julio Jones, Davante Adams, and Odell Beckham on just 71 targets for the entire season. With Lamar showing significant improvement as a passer from year 1 to year 2, Hollywood could very easily have a string of 5 or 6 or 7 seasons straight of over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns per season. Brown is in a prime position to be receiver of the 20s, and for what it's worth, should note what not to do from his older cousin Antonio if things start to sour. The drawback of Marquise, in my opinion, that could hurt him is his size, as he weighed in at just 166 pounds at the combine last year, and I'm not an expert on this topic, nor am I claiming to be one, but I can't imagine that taking hits consistently from players that are 40, 50, or 60 pounds heavier than you being good for the long term and keeping him healthy on the field. But assuming Marquise stays healthy for the sake of this video, he is in a prime position to be the face of the receiver position for the 20s. Next up is A.J. Brown, who aside from a Week 1 game in which he had 100 yards, had a drought for about 10 games, only to pick it up and finish his rookie season with 4 games of 100 or more yards in the final 6 of the season. Predicting AJ's future is going into murky waters, because we don't know the quarterback situation he will have with Ryan Tannehill being a question mark. With DJ, we know he produced with a below-average quarterback, and Marquise, we know he has a great franchise quarterback. But with Ryan Tannehill, we don't know if this was a fluke stretch to end the 2019 season, and we don't know at the time of this video release if Ryan will stay in Tennessee long-term or go somewhere else, because he, at minimum, will receive a deal similar to what Case Keenum got from the Broncos in the 2017-18 offseason after leading the Vikings to an NFC Championship game appearance. So AJ looks to be a future great wideout for sure, and I really hope he is. He finished his rookie season with over 1,000 yards on over 20 yards per catch and 8 touchdowns, which is insane for a second-round draft pick as a rookie. He should have never fell as far as he did in the draft and is now making teams pay for it week in and week out. If Tannehill is to stay in Tennessee long-term and be AJ's quarterback for the first half of the decade, there's no reason he can't put together 1,000-yard season after 1,000-yard season, given what these two have already done in their short time together. Whether or not he does that, we will have to wait and see, but AJ will most certainly be a receiver to watch in the 20s, and I'm looking forward to seeing how he progresses. The final current NFL receiver I'm going to focus on is Seahawks receiver DK Metcalf. DK finished his rookie season with 58 catches for 900 yards exactly and 7 touchdowns. DK is the epitome of a big body receiver, and at just 22 years old with an MVP level quarterback in his prime, DK could set the bar very high for receivers in the early 20s to hit his mark. Russell Wilson in 2019 had an insane ratio of 31 passing touchdowns to just 5 interceptions, and his and DK's chemistry will only increase over the next couple of years. While DK had just 1 game above 100 yards receiving in 2019, he had 9 above 60 yards, and for a player who had an extremely slow 3-cone time and short shuttle, and for a player who was called a one-trick pony entering the draft, it was a productive rookie season and one he can build on heading into the new decade. DK's route running should only get better as he continues in the NFL, and when it does, I expect him to become a steady receiver, and honestly, I don't put it past him to get 10 or more touchdowns for a lot of seasons in his career. I truly think the sky is the limit for DK because he has a lot of factors that go in his favor, including being young at the turn of the decade, a Hall of Fame quarterback who is only 31, and can only go up from here. Before I get into more receivers, I left out a few that could very well be up for the receiver of the decade. That include 49ers rookie Deebo Samuel, Bucks wide receiver Chris Godwin as he's only 23 years old, and Redskins receiver Terry McLaurin. I did not include Falcons second-year player Calvin Ridley because he is already 25 years old, and quite honestly, who knows what he will do once Julio and Matt Ryan leave. Juju Smith-Schuster could have also been considered, but I did not include him as he had a slump of a third season and produced just 552 yards receiving in 12 games played. Not to say any of these players can't be the receiver of the decade because they can be, but I think the other players I mentioned and focused on have a better shot than they do. And if we revisit the video at the end of the 20s and they proved me wrong, more power to them for their performance. Now I'm going to dive into some current college players, and there will be a lot of similarities with how I'm going to do this, but I will discuss who will be turning pro in the next year or two, and who else to start with other than Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy is at the time a very good NFL draft prospect, and is coming off of a junior year in which he had over 900 yards and 9 touchdowns. Jeudy is a blue-chip prospect, but his NFL success, like nearly every other receiver, will depend on who takes him. If Jeudy goes in the top 10 like he should and gets drafted by the Cardinals at 8 for the sake of this video, Kyler Murray to Jerry Jeudy would be a lethal connection for the next decade. Jeudy could easily rack up stats in the desert, and if Larry Fitzgerald would come back for one more year, the two of them could develop a mentor to younger player relationship and spring Jeudy even higher on his NFL path. I love Jerry Jeudy and want him to do well, but his NFL success largely depends on where he gets drafted and ultimately who is throwing him the football. The next prospect we'll discuss is former Sooner wide receiver CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb, like Jeudy, is another great prospect in the 2020 draft, and I think Lamb has all-world potential. He has NFL size, has great hands, and has proven he can make plays after he gets the ball and isn't just a move-the-chains receiver. He is truly a game-changing receiver, and if he goes in the top 10 or 15 picks like he should put up very good numbers for nearly the entirety of the decade. There of course will be an adjustment period, but we'll see how long that is in a year or two. A potential landing spot for him, and this applies to Jeudy as well, is number 4 to the Giants or as far as 11 to the Jets. This is the draft order at the time of this video, and I'm sure it will change, but as of now I don't see Jeudy or Lamb dropping past 11 to the Jets. For the sake of this video, we will say Lamb goes at 11 to the Jets, though I think someone would trade up before he falls this far. Anyway, with Sam Darnold being just 23 when the 2020 season starts, Darnold and Lamb will have the whole decade to grow as players and people, and I think by 2022 at the latest, CeeDee would be a Pro Bowler. Darnold needs someone other than Gase to be his coach, but if they get Matt Rule or someone else to lead them, the future is as high as they want it to be with a Darnold to Lamb connection for the 20s. CeeDee could put up gaudy numbers if he goes to the Jets and they get a competent NFL coach. The final player I'll discuss is current Clemson receiver T. Higgins. T. Higgins has a national championship game to play before he goes pro yet, but in his final 2 years at Clemson, he put up 25 touchdowns and over 2,000 yards receiving. 2020 is a deep draft of receivers, and T should be selected in the first round, but you never know with how the draft goes. T should have immediate impact on a team, and at 6'4", 215 pounds, he will immediately step in and be a red zone target from day one. I hope whatever team he goes to actually uses him in the red zone, unlike the Falcons with Julio, who has just 23 touchdowns in the past 4 seasons. Anyway, Higgins should be a consistent receiver from day one, and I hope he goes to a team with a young quarterback so he can develop along with the young quarterback. In a perfect world, T could every year, excluding year 1 and 2, produce a stat line of something around 75 to 80 catches for 11 to 1,200 yards along with 10 to 13 touchdowns. There are a lot of other receivers I didn't mention in this video that include Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith, Laviska Shenault, Jamar Chase, and Justin Ross, to name a few. I hope all of these guys have productive NFL careers and wish nothing but the best for them. Also, I plan to make this a living for myself personally, and I fully intend on revisiting this video at the end of the 2020s, and hope you subscribe to the channel and like the video and support my channel over the next decade. There will certainly be some players drafted in the 2024 to 2026 area that will have an impact like Mike Evans and Michael Thomas did in the 2010s, but those guys are in high school now, and I'm not going to project what player will do what, because there's simply too many variables to project 4 or 5-star recruits. Anyway, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Again, thank you for watching, and have a great day. Skol Vikes.